Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Hello and welcome everyone to our latest webinar in the series, Workflows of the Future for Standards. We hope you find the series interesting and informative. My name is Andrew Robinson and I'm working with my colleagues on our standards program at CCC, and I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to everyone. A global leader in voluntary collective licensing, CCC builds innovative solutions that connect content and rights in contextually relevant ways through software and professional services. In our first event, we were looking toward the future and considering user needs and expectations, as well as touching on granular content and future business models. Today, we are going to look at copyright and licensing and what it means for users and standards development organizations. In particular, we look at collective licensing, which may well be a subject that is not fully appreciated by many. We're also grateful for the support of the US International Trade Administration's Market Development Cooperator Program in bringing you this series. We are very lucky today to have a tremendous panel, recognized experts in their field. And without further ado, I'd like to hand over to our facilitator for the day, for the meeting, Jonathan Clark.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Hello, everyone. My name is Jonathan Clark, and I'm really delighted to moderate today. Just to mention first, if you have any questions or comments, either right now or during the opening words or after that, please use the chat, and I'll be monitoring that, and so will Andrew. So please use that for if you want a private message, obviously send me a private message, but if you'd like to post a question, then please use the chat. Where we go. The agenda slide, Hayley. Thank you very much. So this is the welcome. We're here for about the next hour or so. We scheduled it for an hour and a quarter, just in case we run on. We did on the first one, so we thought we'd add a quarter of an hour just to take account of that. We have two speakers for you today, Michael Healy and Ghislaine Forêt. Michael will come up first. I'll introduce him shortly, and then we'll have any questions and answers, questions that come up on the basis of his words, and then we'll move to Ghislaine, and then afterwards we'll have an open discussion. And really, open means open. It's here to ask anything you'd like, any questions that you or comments that you'd like to make, and then we'll finish. So, without further ado, let me introduce Michael to you, Michael Healy. Michael is an executive director at CCC, and he's also chair of ISNI, which is an ISO standard. And actually, Michael's been involved in book standards for many, many years in all sorts of capacities, as well as his role now in copyright clearance. And I really can't think of anyone better to kick this session off on copyrights and standards. So I'm not going to talk anymore. I'm going to hand it over to Michael and take it away, Michael.
Well, thanks very much, Jonathan, and thank you, Andy, also for the introduction. And welcome to everybody who's joined this morning, this afternoon, this evening, wherever you are. As Jonathan said a moment ago, I've been helping to build international standards for the book industry for about 25 years. These days, I'm more involved in helping others maintain those standards and manage those standards, which are mostly ISO-related ones. ISBN I was involved in the digital object identifier and many other standards during the course of my career. You know, it's costly work. I don't need to tell this audience anything about that, but I'm a firm believer that standards have driven huge efficiencies in the publishing value chain for decades. And I firmly believe also that standards development organizations, like many represented here today, have the right to be compensated for the incredibly important work they do and the very costly work that they do. And copyright clearly stands at the heart of all that calculation. It's at the heart of the creative economy. So much of the global economy is driven by creators these days, whether they're publishers, artists, musicians, authors, whatever. And keeping that economy healthy, keeping it vibrant, depends on creators such as you being able to and being motivated to continue creating. Copyright, as I say, is fundamental to that because it's such an important part of the process of incentivizing creators and protecting their works, whether those works are books, musical works, scholarly articles, standards, or whatever. At the heart of copyright, you find two very simple principles. Firstly, that the reproduction of a rights holder's work is a legal right controlled by the rights holders themselves. And secondly, that rights holders have the right, if they choose, to be rewarded for that reproduction. Now, content licensing is one of the market mechanisms that's used to get content into the hands of users. Primary licensing, whether it's subscribing to a journal or a database, that's the dominant model, of course. And that's usually a one-to-one commercial relationship between the content owner and the content user. But we mustn't forget that for decades, and in many, many parts of the world, there has been a vibrant secondary licensing system, a collective licensing model in operation. The ways in which collective licensing operates, it varies from country to country. It's not the same in Sweden as it is in France or in the United States and Australia. Nevertheless, wherever you look, collective licensing shares a very fundamental purpose, and that is to offer content users and content owners a very, very efficient way of licensing secondary reuses of copyrighted content and to collect and distribute the royalties that come from that process to rights holders. Billions of dollars flow through the collective licensing process all the time, and it protects rights holders' content, it rewards the rights holders, and delivers real value to users in terms of authorized usage and a means of collaboration. Now, at CCC, where I work for the last 10 or 11 years, this is work we've been doing for about 40 years. And in that time, more than 20,000 publishers have chosen to work with us on and I stress this very much, on a voluntary and non-exclusive basis. And what they do is entrust to an organization like CCC their secondary reuse rights for licensing to corporate and academic customers, and for republication licenses to other publishers. And in the 40 years we've been doing this as a non-profit organization, we've sent billions in royalties to publishers over that period. Royalties that we know have become a valuable and additional revenue source, complementing primary sales and subscription business of publishers. I ought to say at this point that publishers of all kinds have been participating in this work, not just academic publishers, not just scientific or educational publishers, but also news, for example, and increasingly with publishers who develop and disseminate standards. And I think this is a reflection of the fact that CCC's customers all around the world want to make authorized, legitimate reuses of a much wider range of content than they did previously. And that definitely includes standards these days. That's a couple of remarks before I hand over to Ghislaine. Our customers are telling us consistently that they want to have lawful access to a wider range of licensed content. But they do want to interact with that content without interrupting their standard daily workflows. For our customers, they want to access and license standards documentation in exactly the same way that they access, for example, journal articles, without having to log into multiple software products or portals and navigate different paywalls. I know from talking to Ghislaine before today's event that she's going to be talking a little bit more about this. And really, fundamentally, the last thing I want to say is that I strongly believe, as someone who's been involved in building standards and maintaining them and managing them myself, this creates an opportunity for standards publishers. Why? Well, firstly, because collective licensing has been there for decades as a proven tool that complements the publisher's own licensing and sales efforts. It is complementary, it doesn't compete. Second, collective licenses permit very, very specific types of reuse, and therefore they help protect standards from infringement. And thirdly, collective licensing has become such an important source of revenue for publishers of all kinds, including standards publishers, supplementing their direct sales work, their subscriptions, and their primary sales. So before I hand over to Ghislaine, the only thing I want to emphasize for anybody who is new to this area is that licensing, I think, is a win-win for everybody involved in this value chain. It's not something new, it's not something controversial. For decades, it has been a proven way of protecting publishers' content and delivering meaningful royalties to publishers, royalties that complement their usual revenue sources. So I'll stop at that point and hand back to Jonathan in case he has any questions and before we move over to Ghislaine.
Thank you, Michael. That was great. There are a couple of questions. One is you mentioned how important reuse is to customers, and you mentioned specific reuse. Could you say perhaps a little bit more about what sort of things are we talking about? What sort of reuse are the customers looking for?
Well, I suppose the key point is the one I made, Jonathan, which is that what customers tell us constantly is they value consistency and clarity in reuse. They want a consistent set of reuse rights across all the content types they use, whether it's standards, scientific articles, news articles, whatever. They want consistency and clarity. And that is one of the great selling points of the licenses that we sell. Whether they want to share part of an important journal article with colleagues in different offices, whether they want to post a piece of that article to a company-wide intranet or brief their board of directors and want to reuse a secondary piece of content. There are lots of different uses permitted by the license, but I do stress that they are on a consistent basis.
Okay, thank you. And you said, I think, and on the slide that collective licensing you think is an opportunity for standards organizations. So I wonder, because I know that not everyone has joined a collective license, what do you think is holding standards organizations back from embracing it? And maybe that's also a question for the audience as well.
Yes, it would be very interesting to hear from so many of the audience members who've been involved in this for such a long time and hold very distinguished positions in large standards development organizations. But implicit in your question, Jonathan, is that point. Some standards development organizations have been participating, not just in CCC's licenses, but in license offerings from other reproduction rights organizations around the world. And they've been doing so fairly enthusiastically, I think. But to answer your question, those who have held back, I think they're holding back because collective licensing, secondary licensing, reproduction rights organizations, for a lot of people, these are still new ideas and concepts to them, even though, as I mentioned on a couple of occasions, these models, these licensing practices have been around for decades. They are still new to a lot of standards publishers. So I think there's a process that has to be gone through, and obviously today's webinar is part of that process. To go through this patient explanation, discussion of what collective licensing is, and just as importantly, isn't, and the opportunities and benefits that I think other types of publishers have understood for decades, but which might still be relatively new to standards development organizations.
So Simon, who actually took part in our first event, just posted a note saying, and I think it's a link to this, is, so what's the main obstacle? What are we hearing as being the biggest obstacle? And perhaps this is also a question later for Ghislaine. What's the main obstacle that stops standards being included in collective licensing in the way that you describe?
Well, that's something I'm very keen to hear from Ghislaine about as an active participant and also the audience. But in my regular interactions with standard publishers, trying to secure their participation in the license offerings, and we do a lot of this, I think the challenge is one of understanding and awareness. This, for example, the need to understand that if you participate in our licenses, you do so on an entirely voluntary basis. This is not some leap of faith into the dark that you can't reverse in some way. It's voluntary, it's non-exclusive, and it's something complementary to what you would normally do when you're selling and licensing on a primary basis, your standards. So I think it's fundamentally a challenge of understanding, for me at least.
Okay, no, thank you. That's right. I'll make sure I ask Ghislaine this after her opening words. And the final one to you, Michael, is so particularly in our first event, and I think we'll hear it again today, there's a sense that a lot needs to change in the way that standards are presented, work more into the workflow, more into the digital workflow. And I just wondered whether, because of your knowledge of all of publishing, whether there's something that we can learn from the transition that other types of publishers have gone through, something perhaps advice or an example that standards organizations could use based on your experience. You know, a lot of publishers have transitioned from print to digital and beyond. Any thoughts there?
I think the first thing, perhaps the key thing is, and this may have been implicit in what I said a moment ago, is a willingness to experiment. Whatever type of publisher you are, whether you're a news publisher, a medical publisher, whatever, there is that first jump into the world of collective licensing. Whether it happened 10 years ago, 1 year ago, or 40 years ago, the jump has to be made at some point, in my view. And as I said, it's entirely voluntary. It's a reversible jump. But once you're in the water, you can step out if you wish. The publishers we've been working with for such a long time, who have embraced collective licensing a long time ago, have been in that embrace for decades. And the experience they have is now a permanent part of their commercial lives. It's sitting happily alongside their direct sales efforts. And I think those standards development organizations that have yet to make the leap, if they do make it, will arrive at the same place that other publishers have, which is they'll adopt a mechanism that drives additional royalties and helps protect their content from infringement via a very consistent reuse license. You have to make the step, but the experience of working with other types of rights holders and some STOs is that once you're in, you tend to stay. And I think that tells you a lot.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much for that. Just a reminder to everyone before we move on, if you have any questions and comments, please use the chat. And now it's my real great pleasure to introduce Ghislaine Fournet. She's worked at IEC since 1998, and she's now head of sales and business development. And we're absolutely delighted that she's agreed to speak to you today. So I'll hand over to Ghislaine. Here you go. Oh, we need to give you sharing rights, I think, for your slides.
Yes, please. Hello, everyone. A pleasure to see so many people, so many familiar names, actually. So let me share my screen. Oh, thank you for inviting me to this event. So like I said, I can see a lot of familiar names, but not all of you are necessarily familiar with the IEC and our activities. Therefore, it's a pleasure for me to give you a short introduction about the IEC. So as you can hear, I've got a French accent because I'm from Geneva, and Geneva is in the French-speaking part of Switzerland. I'm trying to improve, but it will stay there. So let's start with a little bit of history. The IEC was founded in London in June 1906, so we're going to celebrate our anniversary in a few days. It was founded by a market need to find common terminology for electrotechnology and to encourage interoperability of the nation's technology. On the left here, you can see the Hotel Cecil in London where the first meeting took place. But if you go to London and try to find it, don't bother, it has been destroyed since. And on the right, you can see Lord Kelvin. Lord Kelvin was the first IEC president. Nowadays, the IEC is an hybrid type of non-governmental organization, often referred as a quasi-governmental. We are a one country, one vote organization whose participants work through the national committees, our members. In the 116 years of the IC's history, the Commission has evolved into the global provider of international electrotechnical standards and a provider of globally recognized conformity assessment systems for the global market. Our vision is IC everywhere for a safer, more efficient world. Our mission is to achieve worldwide use of IC international standards and conformity assessment services that ensure the safety, efficiency, reliability, and interoperability of electrical, electronic, and information technologies to enhance international trade, facilitate broad electricity access, and enable a more sustainable world. Our values are trustworthy, inclusive, independent, and progressive. Nowadays, IC work covers electrical and electronic components, devices, and systems used in the generation of reliable electricity in homes, offices, and health facilities, manufacturing, transportation, agriculture, lighting, electrical installations, information technologies, and much more. IC work always includes interoperability, safety, electromagnetic interferences, and the responsible use of hazardous substances and waste management. If you are familiar with the IC, this you might not yet be aware, because our new statutes and rules of procedures have been approved last year and implemented in January 2022. We have new advisory groups, the Governance Review and Audit Committee, the Diversity Advisory Committee, the IC Forum, just to name a few. And another big change for me personally, because at the IC, we used to call our headquarters in Geneva the IC Central Office, and now we have a new name, the IC Secretariat. So we are still in transition, and I'm still making the mistake here and there. Our core principles are transparency and accountability, performance management, and diversity. When we look at what we call the IC family, so the members and the affiliates, well, it keeps growing. In 2020, we had 2 new members, Ethiopia and Uganda. And new affiliates, Somalia joined us in 2021, and last year we had Timor-Leste. So as I mentioned, the IC Secretariat is in Geneva, but we have regional centers all over the world, in the USA, Brazil, Kenya, and Singapore. Talking about the world, let's talk about the world of standards. We can simplify by saying that basically there are 3 layers. There's the international level with IEC, ISO, and ITU. And guess what? We are all based in Geneva. ITU is just across the street. In terms of regional cooperation, we work very closely with Senelec at the European level. As an example, 80% of their standards are identical to IEC standards. But there's other regional organizations that we cooperate with all over the world. In Africa, there's AFSEC, for example. In the Americas, CANINA. Then Asia Pacific, there's PASC. I'm sure you have heard of those acronyms before. And then there's the national level with our members, the national committees. And those national committees are encouraged to adopt IEC standard as their at the national level. We also collaborate with many different organizations. You recognize their logos, I'm sure. We have more than 30 agreements and memorandum of understandings, and also more than 800 technical liaisons with international organizations and SDOs. Before a product can enter a market, it generally needs to be able to demonstrate to the buyer or regulator that it is safe and performs as promised in terms of energy efficiency, reliability, sustainability, and many other criteria. The IEC provides a framework that supports all types of conformity assessment and allows for testing to be transparent, predictable, comparable, and affordable. IEC international standards, together with the conformity assessment, help reduce trade barriers caused by different certification criteria in different countries. The IEC conformity assessment systems also help to remove significant delays and expense for multiple testing and approval. So the IEC manages the operation of 4 worldwide conformity assessment systems. These CA systems represent the only globally standardized approach to testing, inspection, and certification. So just to give you the name of those acronyms that are becoming more and more known, but you are not necessarily familiar with them. So let's begin with IEC-EE, the System of Conformity Assessment Schemes for Electrotechnical Equipment and Components. We have IEC-EX, the System for Certification to Standards Relating to Equipment for Use in Explosive Atmospheres. IEC-Q, a Quality Assessment System for Electronic Components. And last but not least, the latest one, you can see that the logo is slightly different, the IEC-RE, the System for Certification to Standards Relating to Equipment for Use in Renewable Energy Applications. We now have over 213 technical committees with close to 20,000 experts at the global level. Those experts are volunteer, they work for the industry. They represent the needs of hundreds of thousands of stakeholders in their respective countries. Together, they prepare the technical rules that encourage the development of technologies that can be sold to most countries in the world. So now let's have a look at what we create of our raison d'être, as we say in French. So our publications. Our publications are offered in color and usually bilingual English and French. We have different types of publications, the biggest one being international standards, but we also have technical specifications, technical reports, publicly available specification, and guides. In terms of format, we still have paper. In some countries, it's still very popular. Electronic PDF. Some standards are also available in a database format, like the graphical symbols, for example. And for several years now, any new publication that is created, developed, is also available in XML format. And all the publications that are valid, that are still valid, have been converted. We went through the process a few years ago. So if we had the Word version available and the publication was still valid, it has been converted in XML format. Then based on those official IEC publications, the IEC Secretariat is creating value-added products. The oldest one and most well-known is consolidated versions, when we integrate the content of the amendment in the base edition. It's a package in the PDF file. You first have the red line where you see the changes introduced by the amendment, and then you have the clean version with the changes accepted, the final version. We use the same process when we have a new edition. So we compare it with the previous one with the red line technique. And for the last 2 years, we have been producing on a regular basis the ultimate stage, if you want, a commented red line. So again, you see the changes between the new edition and the previous one. And the main changes are commented by the experts that develop the standard. They explain why that particular clause has changed. They also give the impact regarding that change. So the feedback from the end users for those products is really, really positive. We are delighted, and that's why we are, whenever possible, encouraging the experts to provide us with the comments. So you may be wondering, how many publications do you have in your catalog? Well, first of all, last year has been a very productive year. 808 new publications have been issued. And in the catalog, at the beginning of the year, we had 11,200 publications. And you can see the split between the different types I mentioned earlier. And then to give you an idea in terms of the average development time, because one of the keywords at the IEC and in many standardization development organizations, it's consensus. And to reach consensus, well, sometimes it takes time. And therefore, last year, the average development time was 30 months. In terms of distribution model, we have two distribution models. We have the retail, so the end user is buying the publication in hard copy, in PDF. When they buy the publication, it can be for a single user. It could be for different people, like a team of 5 people. It will be always the same 5 people that will access and use the publication. Or it could be a networking license with a number of simultaneous users. And then we also have subscriptions, the publications available on a subscription basis, so yearly subscription. It can be for the full collection, a thematic collection, a customized list of technical committees, or even at the granular level, a customized list of publications. So those publications, well, they can be purchased directly from the IEC Secretariat, but all our members, of course, have also the right to distribute IEC products. And we also have sales outlets, and I can see some names in the participant list that are sales outlets. And thanks to a new agreement with CCC, not only reproduction of IEC publications extracts can be requested, but IEC publications can also be purchased directly through them. In terms of copyright protection, with each IEC publication that we sell, there is a EULA that is provided, so it's an end user license agreement. On our IEC web store, the licensing conditions are always clearly highlighted, because let's be honest, when you buy something and have you read all the conditions, regardless of the length of the EULA, people tend to tick the box and they don't read the condition. But here we really highlight the conditions regarding the number of users, regarding how many times the user can print the publication. And on top of it, our publications on the IEC web store, there's no DRM. We just watermark the bottom of each page with the end user name, company, number of users, and the web store order reference. On the left-hand side, you can see the cover of a brochure that was developed by IEC and ISO. It is available to explain the importance of copyright and the different licensing options that are available for end users. So here it is in a nutshell, an introduction to the IEC, a bit of history or products and what people are allowed to do with them. I didn't go into details. I'll let you ask questions and we can talk more about the future as well. We have already heard SMART, and we are, of course, involved in this exciting journey towards SMART standards.
Wonderful. Thanks, Ghislaine. I think I took my mute off now. Yeah, I do have some questions. I just to echo Simon's words that he put on the chat, I would like to open a dialogue here today. So please do share your thoughts either by chat, or if you want to speak, then just raise your hand and we can unmute you. There's a question coming. Andrew asks, there's the expert commentary that you mentioned about the standard, the redlining. Is that created during the committee process, or is it editorial comment afterwards? And are all these comments delivered as part of the standard?
So there's comments and comments. Let me explain. During the creation process of IEC publication, the draft is commented by the participating member of that technical committee. And that process has been ongoing for many, many years. Here, what we ask the expert to do is to focus on the main changes and give explanations on why and the impact. Of course, the comments that have been exchanged during the creation process, some of them may be, if I may say, recycled in that CMV version, to use an acronym. You know that Standards World, we love acronyms. So for the CMV, the experts may use some of the comments that have been exchanged during the development process. In terms of timing, definitely we reach out to them as soon as possible. We have some constraints in order to develop a CMV, different constraints. One of them is, well, first of all, we need to be able to create a red line, which means that if the previous edition is very, very old, before 1997, we will not have the Word version because at the time, well, we were not using computer, it was typewriters. And those old publications, they have been scanned, of course, they're available in PDF, but it's PDF image. And even if there is a OCR layer, so you can text search those old publications to use that content, to transfer that in Word, it would require too much editing, too much quality control. So those, they're excluded. Then there's another constraint. Even if we have the Word version of the previous edition, sometimes technical committee experts introduce a lot of changes and they completely reorganize the structure of the publication. And in that case, the red line, oh, it's really red, there's red everywhere. So for the end user, not really user-friendly to end up with a document that has red everywhere. And last but not least, because it's the most important condition, we need the experts to be willing to do this extra work because, as I said, they are volunteers. We are not paying them to spend time, extra time, to provide us with those comments. Therefore, if you look in our catalog, so far we have 24 CMVs. So you may think, yeah, 24 out of 11,200, it's peanuts. We tend to agree with you, but on the other hand, when you look at the number of new publications that we issue each year, there's 800 last year, but out of those 800, roughly half were revisions. Others were brand new editions, so you have nothing to compare to for those products. So that gives you an idea that it's an exercise, it's a value-added information that we provide to the end users. We try to do it as often as possible. We have a lot of other CMV in the pipeline, and almost every month we issue a new one. So CMV commented version.
Commented version, thank you. So a couple of questions came in somewhat connected around smart standards. You mentioned XML and SMART, and Greg was asking, what do you see as the challenge of securing content? And Simon is looking about the challenges around providing granular content. And I had a question about that as well. So let's switch to smart standards, XML, and what's your experience so far?
So I'm involved in the joint IEC ISO joint business group business model. And we are having exactly this type of conversation because there's the potential that looks very exciting to be able to provide only part of our publications at the granular level, at the closed level. With XML, it's very easy to do that. But then we have a lot of questions because the technical point of view is one thing, but then we have questions not just in terms of how much do you charge for it, But on a legal point of view, what are the consequences on the liability point of view? If you provide a clause 2, and just before there was some kind of restriction that was saying, the next clause will apply for this and this, but not for that. But if you only have the part that appears after, you will not know about the restriction. So how do you make sure that the end users will be aware, okay, it's nice that you can use only one part and you can access only one part, but what about the integrity of the publication itself? So that's the kind of questions that we are thinking about. There was some proposals that, okay, on one hand, we can provide access to just some parts of the publication, and in parallel, they can still read the full publication. Like this, we will be on the safe side, and there will be the end users will be able to do their due diligence, if you want. So that's the questions that we have. But in terms of the smart project, we need use cases in order to test the market, to see are end users ready for such products. And what about our members? We have a lot of common members at ISO and IC, as you may know. And how will they be able to provide access to those publication at the granular level on their own, or do they ask us to do all the work? And honestly, at this stage, I don't have the answer, because we are still in the on one hand a bit brainstorming phase, but there's another group in parallel that is working on use case, because you can have many different scenarios, which is great, but we need to be able to test that with the market. And that's why it's going to happen in the coming weeks and months. The group working on the use case will provide us with concrete situations, concrete examples. Okay, there you go. I don't know yet, because they will give us that in few weeks and months. And then based on those use cases, we will come up with a scenario and ideas on how we can consider the technical access point of view, the legal considerations, and of course, the pricing, the business model. So it's a long journey. We will have some pilots, and in terms of timing, we hope to be able to finish in 2024. And it will be an additional offer. PDF will not disappear in the next 2 years. Paper will not disappear in the next 2 years. Paper has been going down, of course, for the last 15 years, but there's still a market. In some countries, paper is still very popular. So, if I look at the IC family, our members, some IC members don't even have a web store. So we have to be careful to make sure that those countries are not left out, and they cannot contribute anymore. We want them to be able to contribute. And here I'm thinking as well in terms of standards, the standardization creation process, when we will have smart publication, smart products in terms of creation process. If it's entirely online and how will the members be able to vote and comment on the smart standards? So the smart, that William, thank you for your questions. Indeed, that's that could be very likely the case, that for some publications you will have the traditional format, and you would have a smart version of that standard available in parallel. It will depend on the use cases. So very likely there will be, I don't think that we will have a one-size-fits-all solution. That's my personal gut feeling.
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, it reminds me of what Stephen Fry once said, when the elevator was invented, stairs didn't go out of business. And I think we always tend to. And I think that's the point, that everything still exists, that still exists. We're just building. And I think that your concept of value add is very good. I don't know, is there anything, Michael, to bring you in on this? Is there something, because I remember this discussion amongst STM publishers very much around what use is going to XML, why should we do it? And yet now we see an awful lot of value-added products being added. Go back to the question I asked you about lessons learned. Are there perhaps new business models that have emerged in publishing that could help here?
Well, it's a little like your analogy, or Stephen Fry's analogy, isn't it? They tend not to be replacement business models when they come, primary subscriptions, outright purchase, etc. These coexist with new models. And I think the challenge for those of us involved in copyright licensing is obviously in consultation with rights holders to keep track of those new developments and, where possible, reflect them in the licenses we sell. And certainly that's a big part of the work we do here, because the landscape facing all rights holders has shifted so significantly in recent years, not just around open access and so on, but in so many other ways too. And the big change I've noticed since I've been here, which is only 11 years or so, the license is so closely integrated now to software solutions, and to complement and fit into the workflow patterns of the licensees. That's the big change, I think. And that evolution that Ghislaine has described so well, and which has come up also in some of the questions, that's never going away. That's just part of what we have to do now.
Great, thank you. Before I go to Dan's question, I just wanted to ask Ghislaine, because you've just decided to join a collective license with CCC. I'm interested in what were your main reasons for doing that? What are the things you see? What are the opportunities, to reflect Michael's language? What are the opportunities you see as being part of a collective license?
It was already mentioned, and I will repeat: win-win. It's a win-win solution for us to be able to have additional channels. My team here in Geneva, we are nine people to cover the whole planet. Not really realistic, and that's why we have the members. The members are key to the distribution of IEC publications and products. We also have resellers, the big ones you're all familiar with. We have agreements with them, and now we work with you for quite some time for the extracts and the reproductions, and now with the sales of the full standard, if you want. So for us, it's another tool in the box.
Okay, makes sense. Yes. Dan had a question around, I think this is back to the consensus of when you're developing the standards. And he says, could you address the importance or the risk to consensus in the approval process, and how that impacts the ability to provide granularity?
So in terms of standardization development, you may have heard that we have the OSD, Online Standardization Development Project, together with ISO again. We work very closely on those on both SMART and OSD. Those are the key foundations for the future, our future, to have the ability to develop the standards in a complete new way. And there was an administrative circular that has been sent last week. They are just starting to test the online commenting, and here I'm talking about the comments that happens during the creation process. So to have those comments fully online in the platform, instead of having the usual Word draft with the line numbers, and then you say, yeah, line number 10, please change the word with this. So to have all that in the fully online in a user-friendly way. And that is one step into having the whole development chain fully online and move away from those Excel and Word files. So, but in the end, it's still a traditional publication, if I may say, because out of the XML, you can create a PDF version. But what about standards that in the future, and very near future, we'll have elements that are not for human consumption, that are for computers to be used directly. Here we can imagine a line of codes, softwares. How will the national committees, the members, be able to see, test, and then provide comments for those elements? And then, as mentioned in the question, what about the granular level of those elements? So those are questions that we will have to think about and make sure that we can continue to create and develop standards with our core principles. Like I said in my presentation, consensus is key. One country, one vote. It is essential for the IEC.
Great, thank you. I have another question here. We hear a lot about DRM, and I noticed that in your presentation you mentioned the fact that you don't use DRM, you use the watermark. And I'm really interested in that. But what was behind that decision, and how does that work for you? Because we hear a lot saying, "Well, we have to have DRM," and I think users pretty much certainly I as a user hate DRM of any kind. So can you expand on that a little bit?
So many years ago, when we started to distribute IEC publications in PDF format, very quickly the question of DRM was addressed, and we took the decision that we're going to trust our customers. Okay, it's a big leap of faith, but we're going to trust our customers. Therefore, that's why we highlight the licensing conditions over and over during the purchase process. And we think, and we've seen that end users, when there's their name at the bottom of the page, they will think twice before forwarding the PDF, because then they lose the control. So that's one aspect. The other aspect, we were thinking that in the end, with DRM, you are punishing your paying customers, because they will have to install a plugin. And depending on your IT department, they may lock your computer and you will not be able to install a plugin. So in terms of customer service, we heard feedback from many IEC members and even ISO members, SDOs, that introduced DRM, and they faced on one hand, backlash from the end users that were very upset. Their customer service was overwhelmed with questions and reissuing token when the customers could not print, and all those kind of things. And for the companies, the SDOs putting in place DRM, they faced decrease of their revenues. There's a case last week. I was in in Vienna for a conference where an IC member shared that when they introduced DRM earlier this year, they had a decrease of 15% of their retail revenues, because customers that were used for so many years of being able to buy the publications without any restrictions, suddenly they had to install a plugin and so on. So they said, no, there's so many other the providers where I can buy the standard. So they change providers. And another aspect, we, of course, there's the carrot and the stick. So to inform the end users, to make sure that, yes, if you want to share the publication, it's possible. You just have to pay a little bit extra. That's it. But for the people, the pirates, the people that really want to have the publications for free, they will always find a way. That's the sad truth. It's like if you want to watch the latest Avenger movie, you can find it for free on the internet pretty easily. But if you want to have a great experience, well, you will go to the movie theater and you will have the Dolby Surround 4DX that you cannot have at home.
Yeah, and I think it's in everyone's. I remember that from the first session we had. I think it was clear that it's in everyone's interest to be copyright compliant. I think it was actually Simon who said that he needs to be able to say that his users and his customers, as an information scientist, the people within his organization are complying with the copyright as well. And so some form of licensing really takes away the worry, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're approaching the hour. Questions, please, from the audience, comments. There's a few come through. I had a question perhaps for both of you. This was something that also came up. And you mentioned, I think, Guilaine, that you're working on a business models group. If we look to the future, if we look sort of 3, 4, 5 years down the road, what changes do you see in the business models? I mean, I think we've partially covered this with the value add, but do you see any fundamental changes in the way the business models of publishing standards? And I think, Michael, I'd like to bring you in on this question too.
At this stage, my gut feeling is that we will have more and more products, publications available on a subscription basis. Definitely. And then there will be the ability, and it will be a challenge, but the ability for the people accessing those publications and products. What about if they create themselves a product that embeds the standard content and sell it to their end users? And by providing this, whatever product they come up with, if the end user doesn't have to buy the standard because it is provided entirely or partly with the product, how do we make sure that the copyright is still maintained, and how do we generate revenues? Do we want to give a carte blanche to those companies that embed standards content in their own products? So that's something that we are looking into, because there's great potential, obviously. And we don't want to create, I will use another French word, usine à gaz. So it has to be as simple as possible. Otherwise, people will push back and say that, no, come on, your conditions are too complicated. We have to sign so many agreements. So we have to find a right balance between, yes, we want to ensure that we have a sustainable source of revenues in the future with those smart standards. But on the other hand, we want to make sure that the end users are able to do what they would like to do with those products.
Great, thank you. Michael?
I think the critical point is the last observation that Guilaine made, which is we have to, I I say we, rights holders and their partners, have to continually look for ways of taking friction out of this value chain. And as we were saying a moment ago, the history of our industry, of our ecosystem, is one of continually evolving business models. But if we keep that at the forefront of our minds and our intentions, that we should be working to meet users, to meet licensees where they want to be met within their normal workflows, then I don't see why the future shouldn't be a good and prosperous one for us all. But I think that ability, that willingness to experiment, that willingness to listen to licensees and meet them where they want to be met, which is in their workflow, then that's the critical point for me.
Okay, thank you very much. So last chance, please, to the audience to join in the dialogue, questions, comments, and then we'll move to some closing words. Wait a second if anyone has anything to say, or raise your hand if you'd like to say something. Is there something that you haven't heard today that you'd like to hear? Okay, then I'd like to ask both Ghislaine and Michael to make some closing remarks, and then I'll hand back to Andrew. Ghislaine.
Yes, it's amazing how time flies. It's already past 5. For me, it was an amazing event. So I would like to thank you for, well, first of all, organizing it and inviting me. As I mentioned, we are in a key point in the transition towards full online development of standards and the smart standards creation. And after 24 years at the IC, I can tell you, I'm not bored. I'm not bored. It's really exciting. And it's great, again, to see so many familiar names. And now that we can slowly resume traveling, I hope to be able to meet in person again in the future. So thank you again.
Thank you. No, wonderful. Thank you very much. Michael, your closing words.
Yes, thank you, Jonathan. I've had a lot of contact in recent years with SDOs, and what I've discovered is that in my one-on-one contacts with them, they always have a lot of questions. Some of them difficult to answer and very sophisticated, some very straightforward. But the process of engagement that we have started in this series, speaking personally, I hope it continues, even if it's on a one-on-one basis. There are colleagues of mine on this webinar, Andy and others, who will be delighted to be engaged with SDOs to address those detailed questions. So very, very much looking forward to that. So just want to end by thanking you and Ghislaine and the entire audience for spending this hour with us. It's been great.
Lovely. Thank you very much for that. And some nice comments coming in. Simon, more of this, please. Okay, well, this won't be the end, I promise you. I'll hand back to Andrew. And thank you again. Thank you very much, Ghislaine. Thank you very much, Michael. It was wonderful, really interesting. And thank you for the audience for participating. And we'll see you again. Andrew.
Yes, thank you very much, Jonathan. Thank you very much, Michael and Ghislaine. That was a really fabulous session. I really very much enjoyed listening to you. Ghislaine, I have to remark that I saw a tweet this morning about languages spoken across the EU and the proportions of the population being able to speak more than one language. And I'm ashamed to admit that the UK came last at 64% only speaking one language, and I think Sweden scored the highest score at 3.4% or something. So yes, it was a delight. Thank you. That was a really informative session. We've seen plenty of comments going through about how wonderful it was. CCC, one of CCC's roles, as we see it, is to bring the market together and to enable conversations to take place. And I think we really achieved that today. I think collective licensing is about bringing a market together. It's about you end users and producers being able to operate in a way that makes content usable. And in the standards world, I think with particularly listening to your comments about DRM, we talk about putting barriers in front of users, which I just don't understand. You know, of course I understand, but it's why do we put barriers in front of people when we actually want them to exploit our intellectual, you know, property, our intellectual capital that's built up in a standard to make to make the world safer or better or smoother or enable trade or whatever it is. You know, these things should be more being able to work more comfortably. I'd also like to very much thank the US Market Development Cooperative Program facilitating this event as well, for helping us with this event. We're very much delighted to have them on board too. So I think it brings me to close the session. We very much want to hear from you. If anybody wants to tell us what you want to know next, or tell us what you want to hear next, or any other feedback, please email me. My email's in the chat. It's also on the screen. No initial, just straight Robinson. So thank you one and all, and thank you, Jonathan, for being our compere today. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Merci.
Yeah. Bye bye.
Merci. Au revoir.